Kyle Busch calls out Chastain after the NASCAR Cup Series race at Circuit of the Americas, and Dale Swartz is expected to receive some pretty massive penalties after what happened near the end of the Cup race at COTA. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start by talking about Blue Cross Blue Shield, as they have become the second partner of the Chicago Street Course race. It had already been announced about a week or two ago that McDonald's would be the first partner of the race. They're expected to have 4 or 5 partners for the event, and now Blue Cross and Blue Shield joined up to become another partner of the Chicago Street Course event. Pretty exciting stuff. Blue Cross and Blue Shield, pretty big company, and glad to see that they'll be a partner of the Chicago Street Course event. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Chevy. As it was announced yesterday that Chevy will become the official vehicle of North Wilkesboro for the All-Star Race weekend, and also for the Truck Series race as well at North Wilkesboro. Chevy, of course, a big partner in NASCAR, got a lot of wins in the Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series. Overall, pretty exciting stuff, and glad to see that Chevy will be the official pace car of the event. Pretty exciting stuff and pretty awesome stuff to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Legends Day. Now, of course, every year for the Indy 500, they always have Legends Day the day before the Indy 500 usually. And Brad Paisley is going to headline this year's 2023 Legends Day. It's unclear what other artists are going to perform on Legends Day, but Brad Paisley, of course, who's had a lot of number ones on the country charts and other music charts. Congratulations getting the opportunity, Brad, and I can't wait to see him out there at Legends Day. The Legends Day is going to happen, and Brad Paisley is going to headline it. Pretty cool and awesome stuff. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about NTT. As it was announced on Monday, the NTT has renewed its IndyCar title sponsorship that was due to expire after this year, with a multi-year term that will start in 2024. NTT has been the major partner, I believe, since 2019 or 2020 season, so they've had a big partnership with IndyCar for a while, and they're also a big partner with, I believe, either Arrow McLaren Espino, Arrow McLaren, or, of course, Chip Ganassi Racing. Overall, pretty good to see NTT renewing their partnership. They've had a pretty big partnership with IndyCar over the last couple of years, and it continues for the long-term future. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Formula One. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern on Monday morning that as F1 looks to make race weekends more exciting, it's evaluating whether 3 practices is almost an excessive amount of time for teams to hone in their setups and strategy. I think less track time, in my opinion, when I look at this, I think less track time on the racetrack is worse. What is with these series, especially nowadays, trying to cut back on track time? Track time makes the weekend a little bit more exciting. And the more track time, the more hype you can get for your event. And what happens is, it goes back to the simulators and stuff, and you spend a lot more money on the simulators, and that's going to make the competition even less competitive. I think the more track time you have, the better it's going to be for everybody. I understand you want to save money, it's a lot of money, but overall, F1's an expensive sport, and I do find it frustrating to see that they're trying to basically cut back on practice and all that kind of stuff. I mean, maybe if they were going to cut back maybe one less practice session, but in my opinion, I think less practice time makes it worse for the competition. I think it would make it worse, and I disagree with the decision if they decide to go with that decision. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Porsche. As it was reported yesterday that Porsche's plans to enter Formula One have been formally put on ice after the collapse of its talks with Red Bull and McLaren. This is not surprising. Porsche had been a firm order to potentially work with Red Bull especially, but of course Red Bull in 2026 is going to be working with Ford, and they're not going to be working with Porsche. Porsche have been trying to get in Formula One for the last year or two now, but of course they're also part of the Audi group, and Audi had been rumored at one point as well that they were looking to get in as well. But still, it's interesting to see that Porsche is put stuff on ice at the moment. It's disappointing to see, but it's not a major shock and not a major surprise. They've put stuff on basically on hold currently at the moment, and they will not be entering at this moment, which is disappointing news, but it's not surprising news to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jordan Taylor. As after the NASCAR Cup Series race, Jordan Taylor yesterday put out a tweet and spoke on his NASCAR debut at Circuit of the Americas about the aggressive racing, the aggressive nature, and thought he could have done a lot better. Praised himself for qualifying very well, qualifying the highest that anyone's qualified for a NASCAR Cup Series race on a road course since 1999 on their debut, and Boris said did that and started, I think, second or third in the event. Jordan Taylor, I really hope, does get an opportunity to come back and race in NASCAR because I don't think he really got to shine completely. I think he was a little bit out for lunch. He didn't race as aggressively. It didn't seem like the car in clean air was good. When he was around cars, people were racing him really, really aggressively and not with a lot of respect on the racetrack. Still, though, I really hope Jordan Taylor does come back and race in NASCAR once again because he was really fun to have in the sport, and I really hope he does decide to make a return and come back to NASCAR in the foreseeable future. I think it would be really, really fun, and we'll see if he does decide to come back and maybe race in NASCAR in the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Tyler Reddick. As during basically post-race media availabilities after Tyler Reddick won the Cup Series race at Circuit Americas, Tyler Reddick was asked about how racing the number 8 car felt. And Tyler Reddick basically said he had a lot of respect for Kyle and showed a lot of respect to Kyle Busch in the race as well and has a lot of respect to Kyle Busch. Obviously, Kyle Busch also, after the race, gave Tyler Reddick a lot of respect, and they put on a really good show near the end of the race. It was aggressive. It was fun to listen and watch those guys battle each other for the win. And I think those two guys are going to be championship contenders this year, both Tyler Reddick and Kyle Busch. But to see Tyler Reddick show a lot of respect to Kyle Busch is, I think, is absolutely phenomenal, absolutely incredible, and I think it's great for the sport, and it's very classy as well to see a driver like Tyler Reddick show respect to a driver like Kyle Busch. I consider both of them very talented drivers, two of the best in the Cup Series at the moment, and to see the respect shown, we've seen drivers at least sometimes giving respect. We're going to talk about respect and etiquette later in this episode, but to see them showing a lot of respect, I think it's phenomenal. I think it's great, and it's awesome to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about a new organization coming into the truck series called Tri-Point Racing. This team has just really come out of nowhere, but they're a team that's based out of Pennsylvania, and according to them, they plan to debut in Mid-Ohio in late July. This is very interesting because we've seen some new teams come up. It looks like the number that they're going to use is number 37, as you can see from their profile page. The number that they're expected to potentially use is number 37. In my opinion, it's really great to see a new truck team out. I wonder what drivers are going to be considered for that team to run. Maybe they get a talented driver like Kyle Weatherman to run a truck race. Well, he's going to be in the Xfinity Series, probably not. But I think that's very interesting. They got a driver like Tri-Point Racing that wants to come into NASCAR and race. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's exciting stuff. And overall, it's pretty cool to see they got a new team looking to come into the truck series. I think it's awesome, and it's pretty awesome to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Blaine Perkins. As it was announced on Monday that Blaine Perkins will drive the 02 for Our Motorsports this weekend at Richmond. Next week at Martinsville, though, we will be a couple weeks from now, though, Kyle Weatherman will be back in the 02 car. Of course, he'll drive the 96 for FRS Racing this weekend. But Blaine Perkins will drive a lot of the rest of the season for the rest of 2023. Blaine Perkins has had an up and down start to the year. Obviously, Blaine Perkins drove beginning of the year at SS Greenlight Racing. He had a very disappointing run with SS Greenlight Racing. So this is another opportunity and another chance to see what Blaine Perkins can do. We know that Our Motorsports had a little bit of struggles at points the last couple of years. So hopefully Blaine Perkins can have a good and hopefully a good run this weekend with the Our Motorsports group. I hope he can have a good run. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Vargas. As it was announced on Monday early afternoon, Ryan Vargas will drive the 30 for On Point Motorsports this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway in the Truck Series. Ryan Vargas has basically changed his points from the Xfinity Series to the Truck Series and will make a lot of starts in the Truck Series this year for On Point Motorsports, including this weekend. Ryan Vargas, very talented driver, in my opinion. He hasn't really gotten the best equipment, hasn't really had a great start to the year, but he did finish 14th at Atlanta Motor Speedway, which is very, very impressive. He survived the carnage and had a pretty good run. Hopefully Ryan Vargas can show what he's capable of, and hopefully he can have a good run this weekend with On Point Motorsports at Texas Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chad Chastain. As it was announced on Monday that Chad Chastain will drive the 41 for Nice Motorsports this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Chad Chastain, of course, the younger brother of Ross Chastain. I think Chad Chastain does have a little bit of talent. He doesn't have as much experience as Ross, and I still think Ross Chastain is a way better driver than Chad Chastain. But Chad does have some talent for sure, and I think that Chad Chastain could have a good run this weekend. We've seen what Nice Motorsports can do with their equipment, and I think he could have a good run this weekend, but we'll have to wait and see what happens and how he will perform. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Chris Hacker. As it was announced on Monday evening that Chris Hacker will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut this weekend at Richmond, driving the number 38 car for RSS Racing. Chris Hacker's made quite a few truck starts over the last couple of years, and he's had some decent runs, but not some great runs. But this is the best opportunity that we've seen Chris Hacker ever have. RSS Racing is a pretty decent team overall. He's going to have Morgan & Morgan on that car this weekend, the For the People sponsorship on his car this weekend. I think Chris Hacker will have a decent run. I'm not expecting to be extremely competitive, but we've seen RSS Racing, especially on the shorter ovals, to contend in a pretty big light. So I think Chris Hacker could have a good run. I hope he can have a good run, and let's see what he can do this weekend at Richmond Raceway. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Stefan Parsons. As it was announced on Tuesday morning that Stefan Parsons will drive the 07 for SS Greenlight Racing this weekend at Richmond. Stefan Parsons, of course, I think one of the most underrated drivers in NASCAR altogether. He's always sometimes gets the best out of his equipment, and I think he'll do a very solid drive for SS Greenlight Racing. I don't know how many races he's going to run for SS Greenlight Racing this season, but it's good to see that they're bringing him in to try to get their equipment a lot better because they've struggled this year with that 07 car. Either electrical issues for Carson Hocevar or some sort of issues or Blaine Perkins can't get up to speed. It just seems like SS Greenlight Racing is not the same team they were a few years ago, especially back in 2019. So hopefully Stefan Parsons can come in there and have a good run with the team this weekend at Richmond Raceway. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mason Maggio. As it was announced this morning that Mason Maggio will drive the 66 for MBM Motorsports this weekend at Richmond, attempting to make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut. Now, Mason Maggio did already try to make his attempt to make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut at Las Vegas, but missed by one spot and barely missed out on making it into the show. MBM Motorsports has struggled so far, to say the least, in 2023. They've struggled to make a lot of races, and a lot of that is due to the competitive cars. Now, I believe only one or two cars are going home in the Xfinity Series. Hopefully, Mason Maggio can make it this weekend. I think Mason is a very talented driver. It's just that he hasn't really had the best equipment to show for it over time. But hopefully we'll see him perform much better, and hopefully he can have a good run this weekend, and hopefully he can make the show at Richmond because he's struggling to make the show. So hopefully Mason can have a good enough car to make the show this weekend at Richmond. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jesse Iwuji Motorsports. As Arca Starting Park Car account Colby Evans put out a tweet on Sunday, and he indicates that Jesse Iwuji Motorsports is expected to return to the Xfinity Series very, very soon. They have a car that they posted on their Instagram page, on the number 34's Instagram page, and their rumor is that they can return at Talladega. I'm very intrigued to see who they'll put in the car. My guess would maybe be Kyle Weatherman, because Kyle Weatherman has driven for Jesse Iwuji's team. Of course, their team's had a little bit of struggles with financial. We know that there's been some lawsuits going on behind the scenes with Jesse Iwuji Motorsports, but it's good to see that they're trying to get back to the track and get back on the racetrack because I would love for them to come back and race. Jesse Iwuji Motorsports really hasn't raced that much. They've only, I think, raced once so far in the 2023 season, so they've not been on the track that much. Hopefully, we'll see him back on the racetrack in the future. My guess is going to be Talladega, but we'll have to wait and see what happens if they do return. But it sounds like they're looking to return here very, very shortly and very soon, and hopefully they can return in the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Dakota TV ratings from this past weekend. As according to Adam Stern, Fox earned a 1.81 rating and 3.129 million viewers for Sunday's NASCAR race at Circuit of the Americas. That is down from a 2.18 rating and 3.731 million viewers last year. That is down almost 16.8% or something along those lines from last year. Now, what are the big factors why the TV ratings are down? And if you even look at the HUT viewership, it was down 12% from 2022. What are the big factors? Number one, it's a road course race. Road course races, even if they're on Big Fox, they generally do not do as good in TV ratings as other races throughout the season. Number two, March Madness is still going on at the moment, and a lot more people are focused on watching March Madness than NASCAR. Number three, the other big factor is Chase Elliott not being in the car. Now, Chase Elliott was on the broadcast this weekend, which I thought that would have boosted the ratings, but the ratings continue to be down. And also, another big factor that I've not seen a lot of people talk about is less people are just in general watching TV. Less people are watching TV, and I think that's playing a big role and a big factor why the TV ratings have been going down time and time again. And I think that they're going to continue to go down until things get resolved very soon. It's frustrating to see TV ratings generally go down. It sucks. Trust me, as a fan, I don't like seeing TV ratings go down, but less people are watching TV and they're going to Twitch streams. From what people say, there's some Twitch streams that go down 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 viewers that watching some of those streams. That's a couple thousand people that can increase TV ratings, and less people are watching television generally. So I don't know what the solution is. I know there's a lot of talk about the future, what the TV negotiations are, but this is going to hurt those TV negotiations, and less money is potentially going to come in with those TV negotiations if the ratings continue to be down. So they're going to have to figure something out to resolve this issue going forward, and hopefully they can resolve this issue soon, because it is frustrating to see the TV ratings go down as much as they have been going down recently, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, I've seen a couple people talk about Bubba Wallace, but after the NASCAR Cup Series race at Circuit Americas, Bubba Wallace was very upset with himself and said something on national television about 3.1 million people on TV. He says he needs to be replaced. Now, obviously, Bubba Wallace is very, very frustrated. He's had 2 weeks where he's not had good races. The first 3 weeks of the year, he's kind of struggled. He did have a top 5 finish at Las Vegas, but it's been kind of a struggle for Bubba Wallace to start 2023. And it seemed like he was blaming himself for the incident, but it really wasn't Bubba Wallace's fault at all. From what we understand, he had an oil line break on his car, and that's what happened to him, and that's how he ran into Kyle Larson, had a broken car. I do want to say this about Bubba Wallace. I think Bubba is a very good driver, but sometimes his emotions do get the best of him. And I think that's one thing Bubba Wallace is going to have to work on as a driver, especially in the Cup Series, is his emotions getting the best of him. And I think that's where Kurt Busch is really going to come into play. Kurt Busch was in a very similar position to Bubba Wallace right now. And I feel like Bubba Wallace, he was showing some maturity at the beginning of the year. He wasn't really mad. He was showing maturity at the LA Clash and was showing maturity at other races this season. But he feels down on himself. And that's the one thing about Bubba Wallace he's going to have to work on as a driver, is not getting down on himself. He's a great driver. There's a reason why he's in that 23 car. There's a reason why a lot of drivers look at Bubba. They like Bubba. He's gotten 2 Cup wins. There's only like 150 drivers in the Cup Series field in the history of NASCAR that have gotten 2 wins. So Bubba Wallace is a very, very good driver, in my opinion, and he's just going to have to working on those emotions and getting those emotions in check. And like I said, with Kurt Busch being a mentor with the team and being part of that mentorship part of the 2311 and the counseling side of 2311, I really believe that can help Bubba Wallace. I think Bubba's a great driver. He just needs a little bit of counseling and work, and I think that Kurt Busch could come in there and hopefully be the person that really can help Bubba Wallace out, because I think that's what Bubba Wallace needs, is a little bit of counseling and a little bit of help there, and if he can get that, I think he will become a much better driver. It's disappointing to see Bubba be hard on himself, but sometimes being hard on himself can be a good thing, but I want to see Bubba Wallace do the best, and I don't like seeing him always be down on himself, because it can be frustrating as a fan. It feels like when Chastain was always down on himself, and I hope that he can get that resolved and not be as down on himself going forward in the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Joey Logano. As it was announced last night that Joey Logano is going to drive the 66 for ThorSport Racing next weekend at Bristol Dirt. That's right, folks. Bristol Dirt is next weekend, and we got a couple Cup drivers that already been announced, but Joey Logano joins the list. Joey Logano actually did race in the Truck Series race at Bristol last year. I believe Joey Logano finished in the top 5 and ran up front. I think he might have led some laps as well in the event. He drove for DJR Racing. Obviously, ThorSport Racing is the established Ford organization at the moment right now, so it's not a shock to see him running and trying to get some experience for the Cup Series race as well. He joins a couple Cup drivers already been announced. William Byron is already been announced, and there's probably going to be a few other Cup drivers that are probably going to enter the event. Wouldn't surprise or shock me if Kyle Larson gets in and runs the event. Wouldn't surprise or shock me on that front. But it's really good to see if Joey Logano is going to come and run the Truck Series race. This will be Joey Logano's first start in the Truck Series, of course, since Bristol Dirt last year. I think Joey Logano will be very, very competitive. I think he'll for sure be one to watch this weekend and that weekend at Bristol Dirt. And I think he will absolutely be a contender for the overall win at Bristol Dirt. I expect him to be a contender, and I think he will be a threat. So we'll see what Joey Logano can do. I think he's a great driver. A good, of course, 2-time Cup Series champion. And we'll see what Joey Logano can do. Try to get his first win in the Truck Series, I think, since 2015 at Martinsville. We'll see what he can do, and hopefully he can do a really good job with the team this weekend. Not this weekend, next weekend at Bristol Dirt. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Motorsports Games once again. Now, a couple days ago, I talked about Motorsports Games. We got more news that's come out of Motorsports Games over the last couple days. So according to Mike Straw, who works in Insider Gamer, who's been basically doing a really good job reporting on this company. He basically got sources telling him that NASCAR 23 never even made it out of the design phase. And also, according to him from last week, Motorsports Games lost $35.9 million in 2022 alone. Now, it's no secret that this company has had a lot of trouble, especially over the last couple of years. This company's been in a lot of trouble, and a lot of people believe this company is a financial scheme. We also know that at this point, there's not going to be an IndyCar game in 2023 as well, and it's getting pushed back to 2024. This company is an absolute scam and a shambles. And I think this is arguably one of the worst companies I've ever seen run in the gaming space ever. And it's a problem with AAA gaming in general. But Motorsports Games has encapsulated everything that is completely wrong with it. We got people not being paid, probably eventually being paid, but not being paid for a very, very long time. You've got money being laundered. You've got just everything about this company is completely wrong. And the NASCAR gaming space, in my opinion, is right now completely screwed and ruined right now. And things need to get fixed. And I don't know exactly what they're going to do about this. This is really, really frustrating. And the NASCAR gaming group, and there's a lot of YouTubers too who are just completely screwed right now and are frustrated about everything that's going on. And they're all playing old NASCAR games from 2005. The last universally loved NASCAR game came out about 20 years ago. The last game that I think was absolutely outstanding probably would have been NASCAR 07. That came out in 2006. It is 2023. Nearly 17 years ago, that game came out. It is absolutely infuriating as a fan. It's embarrassing. It's unacceptable. It's ridiculous. And things need to change very quickly because not only is it frustrating, but it's completely unacceptable what's going on, and it needs to be fixed very, very quickly because it's disappointing, it's unreal, and completely unacceptable about everything that's going on. It needs to change. It needs to change very, very quickly because it's ridiculous, it's unacceptable, and things need to be fixed quickly when it comes to motorsports games. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, I talked about Kurt Busch quite a bit on the channel yesterday, but I didn't really touch on this much. Kurt Busch, apparently, according to a tweet that Alan Cavana has, Kurt Busch apparently had a doctor's appointment yesterday and is hoping for a positive update. Kurt Busch obviously was in the Fox Sports booth this past weekend and was very emotional on the last lap when his car that he drove last year went on to win the race. Kurt Busch, of course, obviously wants to get back behind the wheel. He has said that many times that he's not completely retired at this point and wants to get back behind the wheel. But first, he has to get medically cleared to get back behind the wheel. And right now, at this particular point, he has not been medically cleared to get back behind the wheel. So hopefully, in the foreseeable future, he's medically cleared to get back behind the wheel. Because I'll be honest with you guys, I miss Kurt Busch being behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car. Kurt Busch, in my opinion, is a driver that I've not only grown up to respect over the years and have gained a lot of respect for, but he's also my favorite personalities. And seeing that emotion in the booth on Sunday really got me in some way and got me very, very emotional as well, seeing the emotion that Kurt Busch was really, really bringing. Because I think Kurt Busch really, he could have been better. He could have been frustrated, but he wasn't bitter. He was happy, and he wants to see 2311 succeed and that organization succeed. And he's done a really good job helping out 2311 Racing. But I really want to see Kurt Busch get back behind the wheel, at least for a couple races this year. I miss seeing him drive a race car. He's a great driver. He's a great person and has become a great person. And just, he's really helped 2311 Racing and guided that team to become a team that has become extremely successful. But he's, like I said, he still has to get medically cleared to get back behind the wheel. And at this particular moment and at this particular point, he has still not been medically cleared. And it's disappointing to see because I think a lot of us do miss Kurt Busch being behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car. Hopefully, in the foreseeable future, we can see Kurt Busch back behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car because it's disappointing to see that he's not been medically cleared at this point. And he's been really helping 2311's got a lot of counseling role, and I'd love for him to go full-time in the Fox Sports booth. But I hope he gets back behind the wheel soon. I miss seeing him behind the wheel. Hopefully, in the foreseeable future, we get a positive update around Kurt Busch. He's been listening to the doctors. He's provided updates with everybody, and he could be better for sure, but he hasn't been better. He's been incredible. He's been courageous, and it just seeing the professionalism of Kurt Busch has been outstanding and absolutely incredible. So hopefully get an update soon around Kurt Busch, and he can get back behind the wheel in the foreseeable future. But if not, it is what it is, and we'll see if Kurt Busch gets clear. But at this point, we still don't know if he's going to get medically cleared or not to get back behind the wheel. Hopefully, in the future, he does get medically cleared. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we are talking about Project 91. Now, Justin Marks went on Sirius and NASCAR radio last night, and he says that Project 91, the next deal to get whoever has been behind the wheel, they already have a driver that is ready to go. Their second driver, the next race they're going to run, which is coming up very, very soon. We don't know exactly which race they're going to run, but they're going to run multiple races this season, and he says that they're ready to go with the next race on. They have a driver ready to go. Is someone who has not raced in the United States that much and does have a lot of experience with something very, very similar to NASCAR. And they have a background that would be very, very good for the NASCAR background. I got started thinking about who potentially could be the driver. And there's one driver that comes to mind very easily. It's Shane Van Gisbergen. I think it's going to be Shane Van Gisbergen. I'll explain why I think it's going to be Shane Van Gisbergen. Shane Van Gisbergen, in my honest opinion, is an incredible talent. He's not racing NASCAR, not racing the United States that much. He's never raced in NASCAR. He has shown interest and wants to race in NASCAR, and he has not been in the United States that much. I think Shane Van Gisbergen, who I think is one of the greatest V8 supercar drivers ever, and arguably one of the best race car drivers across the globe at this particular moment, I think it would be absolutely amazing and great to see him come over race in the United States and race at Project 91. And I'm not saying he's going to immediately contend, but I think Shane Van Gisbergen, with his recent racing experience and how much experience he has, he would make a lot of sense to get behind the wheel of a next-gen car. But if it isn't Shane Van Gisbergen, who could it be? Some people suggested Valentino Rossi, and that wouldn't be a bad shout. We know that Valentino Rossi's been getting involved in racing recently outside of the motorbikes. He's been involved with BMWs. He's been involved with basically GT racing. He's been involved in supercars and all that kind of stuff. He'd be an interesting choice. Daniel Ricciardo is another driver from Australia. He doesn't have a lot of experience racing in NASCAR, and we know that Daniel Ricciardo, he's shown interest in wanting to race in NASCAR, so that could be a potential possibility. Daniel Ricciardo comes into play, but I still think it's going to be Shane Van Gisbergen. I think Shane right now is one of the best drivers across the globe right now at this particular moment, and I think it would not only be fun, but I think it'd be very exciting for him to get the opportunity and get the chance to race in NASCAR. So I hope it is Shane Van Gisbergen. It'd be fun to have him race in NASCAR, and hopefully we get to see Shane Van Gisbergen get the opportunity, because I'd love to see him get a chance. I'd love for him to get an opportunity, and I really hope and pray that Shane Van Gisbergen is the driver who gets to drive the Project 91 car in the foreseeable future, in my opinion. Now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about respect and etiquette on the racetrack. So, near the end of the NASCAR Cup Series race at Circuit Americas, we probably saw the worst we've seen in road course racing, where we saw a lot of pileups and a lot of wrecks and no respect and etiquette on the racetrack. Now, NASCAR, basically the guy who runs the SVP of NASCAR, which is Elton Sawyer, went on Sirius and NASCAR radio on Tuesday morning. And he says that NASCAR really saw nothing wrong with the intensity at the end of the race. In the 74-plus year history of NASCAR, they've seen a lot of aggressive racing. Well, a lot of drivers in the industry completely disagree. First, Kyle Busch. We talk about the lack of respect and etiquette on the track. We have to go back to last week when Kyle Busch just talked about this at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And he said that their drivers have no respect and etiquette in the garage or on the racetrack at all. And drivers are frustrated with that in the garage. And he said he has tried to talk to guys and they don't listen. Then, Denny Hamlin actually responded to Elton Sawyer's comments in the below, and he said, "Oh, really?" And then, he also went on his podcast and called out a ton of drivers. Among them were himself, Kevin Harvick, Jordan Taylor, Ross Chastain, and I even believe Kyle Larson got mentioned as well. Alex Bowman near the end of the race basically called it a complete embarrassment. What we saw at the end of the race was a complete embarrassment and not a good showing of what road course racing could be. Ryan Preece after the race basically called out everyone a bunch of hacks and called out the lack of respect on the racetrack. And he's done that before, too, when he and Carson Hocevar battled for the win at, I can't remember, he basically battled Carson Hocevar at the end of the Charlotte race, and they had contact near the end and basically called out the lack of respect from Carson Hocevar. The drivers in the garage are just very frustrated and tired of the lack of respect on the racetrack and etiquette on the racetrack. And I feel like the racing etiquette, especially at road courses and in respect all across NASCAR in general, has been going off the rails and been going downhill really over the last couple years. And it's basically been a downward spiral of the lack of respect on track over the last couple years. When I became a fan back in 2007, you had aggressive racing on the racetrack. That was normal. You had really aggressive racing. but you also had clean and respectful racing. And if a driver did something stupid on the racetrack, the old guard of the crowd, people like Tony Stewart, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, would tell you what's right and what's wrong, and would confront you about the incident. The problem nowadays is that the older guard, the younger drivers, are not afraid of the older guard of drivers. Kevin Harvick was pissed off at Chase Elliott at the end of the race at Bristol. Chase Elliott's not afraid of Kevin Harvick. The younger crowd of drivers have grown up in a different way, and I think a lot of this aggressive lack of respect and etiquette on the track, I think, comes from racing in the Truck Series, in the Xfinity Series, and ARCA. So how do you fix the etiquette and respect on track? Number one, you all need to remove the unlimited overtimes. I think the fact that unlimited overtimes play a role in this, because look at all the races we've had unlimited overtimes this year. 4 of the 6 races this year have had overtimes. And all 4 of those races have resulted in crashes in some shape or form in the races. They resulted in a last lap wreck in the Daytona 500. We had a last lap wreck where Brad Keselowski and Allmendinger wrecked at Las Vegas. You had a last lap wreck, basically a couple wrecks at Phoenix. Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain ran into each other, and basically before they had a 3-car wreck with the 3 drivers who dominated the Xfinity Series a year prior, wrecking each other on the track. The etiquette is going away, and it's frustrating as a fan watching it. Because don't get me wrong, I love aggressive racing and respectful, clean racing too. But when you got guys piling 6 or 7 wide, going into a corner, sending into each other, wrecking each other, basically with the lack of respect and no regard to the respect on the racetrack, it's just frustrating to watch as a fan of the sport. And it's getting frustrating to watch. And I think that's why less people tuned in this weekend. I think that people got tired of the bad etiquette. For people who said at the racetrack, the fans were getting mad and pissed off about the etiquette going away. Like I said, when I grew up being a fan, I did not see this kind of stuff we're seeing. And it's just frustrating to watch, and it's disappointing to see, because when you had, I came fan, you had guys that race each other clean, respectful. And I think what's going to have to happen is, one, NASCAR's got to get rid of the unlimited overtimes. I think that plays a role. But the other thing it needs to change is where the restart zone is, because you don't see this really at Watkins Glen, and you don't see this at Sonoma. You only see this at a couple different tracks like COTA and the Indy Road Course. Get the restart zones a little bit farther back to fix the problem. And maybe do single file restarts. That would fix some of the issues, because I think single file restarts, you got to let these guys spread out a little bit, because these guys can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. And I agree with Denny Hamlin. They cannot be trusted on the racetrack. So something's got to change, and it needs to change very quickly, and the racing etiquette has got to get resolved sooner rather than later, because as a fan of the sport, it's getting frustrating to watch these guys run into each other, and the lack of respect is unreal. I don't know if the NASCAR can penalize drivers for it, but something needs to change, and it needs to change very, very quickly, and hopefully it changes very, very soon. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, after the NASCAR Cup Series race at Circuit of the Americas, Kyle Busch was being interviewed by the media and talked about how Tyler Reddick and him raced with a lot of respect, and said that Tyler Reddick raced Kyle Busch with a lot of respect. Kyle Busch also called out the lack of respect on the racetrack once again, like he did at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and you had Ross Chastain sitting right next to Kyle Busch. And Kyle Busch, basically speaking to media, he basically called out Ross Chastain, and he says somebody else that doesn't know anything about clean over here. Basically calling out Ross Chastain's etiquette on the racetrack and calling out Ross Chastain. Look, I think while Kyle Busch did not get ran hard by Ross Chastain in that specific race, Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch have had a little bit of a history against each other. Go back to Richmond in August. There was contact between both of them. Kyle Busch got turned by Ross Chastain, and Kyle Busch spun out. And Ross Chastain has made a lot of drivers over the last couple of years really mad and really frustrated. And the list continues to grow in the Cup Series. Last year, Ross Chastain and Denny Hamlin have had a history of feuds. They've gone all the way back to last year at Gateway. There was contact between them. Chase Elliott has had a problem with Ross Chastain's etiquette in the past. We've seen other drivers in the Cup Series get frustrated. Eric Jones has shown his frustration. AJ Allmendinger has shown his frustration. Just this year alone, you've had Alex Bowman get really frustrated with Ross Chastain for not working with him. You've had other drivers not happy with Ross Chastain. You also had his teammate this past weekend at Circuit Americas get pissed off and frustrated with the respect on the track, because basically Chastain ran Bowman up there. Yes, Briscoe kind of pushing Chastain, but Chastain was down on the bottom and sends it up the corner and gets into his teammate quintessentially. And Chastain basically says that you're not entertained by the kind of stuff we're seeing and a lack of respect. Ross Chastain, I like him a lot, and I've said this about Ross Chastain. He deserves every opportunity he's got. And he got to the Cup Series because of his aggressive nature. And he's always been like this. You go back to the Xfinity Series, you go back to the Truck Series, And Ross Chastain has always been very, very aggressive, and drivers have not always respected him for it. But now he's up front contending a lot more frequently with Trackhouse Racing, and you look at it, and you see Chastain on the racetrack, and drivers are getting frustrated by it. And I think Kyle Busch calling out Ross Chastain is completely justified. I know that, like I said, we didn't see Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch really get into it at all in the Cup race, but I can't blame Kyle Busch for being frustrated with Ross Chastain's etiquette on the racetrack, because I think that's the thing it is. A lot of drivers are tired of the lack of respect. They're tired of the lack of etiquette on the racetrack, and drivers are getting beyond frustrated, and I think it's just completely unacceptable what is going on right now. And things do need to change in the Cup Series sooner rather than later, because it's just inexcusable, some of the things we're seeing. And Kyle Busch is tired of it. And I'll say this about Kyle Busch. People used to think Kyle Busch was a dirty racer. I think Kyle Busch, over the last few years, has become one of the most respectful drivers on the racetrack and shows a lot of respect on the track. He comes back, doesn't wreck you, he doesn't have to turn you, he races you with clean and respect, and drivers respect him for that, and that's why Kyle Busch is becoming a fan favorite in a lot of ways. Not only is Kyle Busch not afraid to speak his mind, which very few drivers nowadays kind of do that, you know that Kyle Busch is going to show you a lot of respect on the track. But a lot of drivers are getting tired of the lack of respect, and they're getting tired of it. And a lot of drivers, even some of the Formula One guys, were frustrated by it. So I can't blame Kyle Busch for being upset, especially at Ross Chastain. I think Ross Chastain, is he going to change his attitude and his ways? No, but Ross Chastain is never going to win a NASCAR Cup championship by racing this way. Yes, Joe Logano won a championship, but I guarantee you a lot of drivers and fans are kind of tired of Ross Chastain's lack of respect on the racetrack in some ways. And fans don't like, you have a lot of people who don't really like Ross Chastain, because Ross Chastain is a likable guy, but he races with a lack of respect on the track. And I think that's why Kyle Busch called him out on Sunday. I cannot blame him, Kyle Busch, in any shape or form, in any way, for showing frustration at Ross Chastain. I think Kyle Busch was completely justified with his comments. I thought it would basically come last week in Atlanta. I was not expecting him to say that at COTA because they didn't have any issues. But again, I can't blame Kyle Busch for being upset with Chastain. They're both in the top 2 in points, not to mention you got Ross Chastain leading the points right now, and Kyle Busch, who's second in the points right now. So those two are at the top at the moment, and maybe we're going to see rivalry and contact between both of them, because Ross Chastain doesn't like people talking about him as much. But when you race people aggressively and with disrespect on the track, eventually it's going to come back to haunt you, and it's going to come back to bite you. So in my honest opinion, I think Kyle Busch is justified in the comments he made, and I'm not surprised about Kyle Busch's comments that he made basically over to Ross Chastain. Not surprised by his comments.